Hey, you guys, welcome back to another episode of Walking Away from Lukewarm Living. I'm your host, Lily, and today I wanted to talk about what my experience was like growing up as a Latina and how that helped shape my identity. So, I grew up in South Central Florida in Polk County, and predominantly where I am located were many Mexican American students alongside me going to school. And so it was very natural, very, normal for, people to be talking about and selling lucas and paleta payasos and, things of that nature, the Mexican snacks. So that's like the first thing that comes into my mind. And I remember, selling Mexican candy myself, because originally I had thought about, this was back in middle school. Originally, I had wanted to sell American candy because, that's kind of like where your mind almost defaults to. And then I started thinking about, I'm like, but what's the cultural background of the students around me like, why can I not say it? And so I started thinking about it, and I thought, they're kids that look like me um, that come from the same background. So why wouldn't I go to the Mexican store, the local Mexican supermarket, and go and get, uh, candy? So that's what I did, and I want to say I got Duvalins. I think that's one of them, and I got a paleta del sandía, but I don't really remember the exact name of the brand. Um, and I think maybe that was it. I can't really truly remember. Maybe there was something else. I think I had cachetadas for a little point in time as well. I can't remember. I think I sold it twice, I want to say. And yeah, ignore the cops. That just tells you where I'm from, right? And so originally I started thinking about, as a child, what was that like? Even like before I went into school, what were things that I experienced that I enjoyed that perhaps weren't exactly 100% super common, right? And I started thinking about how, as a child, and I'm sure this is like the same thing for different cultures, but these are just things that stand out to me, like reflecting upon, my past as a child. And I do remember a lot of animals growing up. I think that's where my love for animals still stems to this day. Next door, my grandpa, he always had lots of different plants and lots of vegetation, different and I remember we had bunnies and hogs and chickens, horses, pigs. I'm trying to think of like what other animals, but there was like a lot of different. Oh yeah, I think there was pigeons at one point too, and of course dogs, cats here and there. My great grandma's house next door. God bless her soul. She's no longer with us, but yeah. So that was like a very big thing. We didn't necessarily go, like, especially as like a small child, um, to the movies or like amusement parks and stuff like that. Like I remember growing up, my cousins and I, we would stay at my grandma's house, and we would just sit there watching TV, like the same movies over and over again. Or we would I remember a really big one was that she would send us out with, like, like those 5 to 10 gallon white buckets, and we would go out into the pasture and go pick wild berries, so like raspberries, blackberries, and we would just be out there for hours just picking them. And of course we would be eating them too at the same time, but I just felt like it was like the closest thing to a little ranchito that we could have had, like if we were in Mexico, because I didn't get to go to Mexico until like my 23rd birthday. And so I think a part of me feels like that was a way to connect with that culture, that lifestyle, even though I didn't know it at the time. I do remember one time, my cousins and I, some of my aunts and my uncles, we were walking in the pasture, and there was like a huge bull that was chasing one of my uncles down because he was provoking him. And I remember just being absolutely terrified, but also at the same time very joyful. I do remember, um, like play fighting, wrestling a lot with my uncles growing up and my cousins and stuff like that. And it's so interesting because it's kind of like one of those things where since you grow up a lot with a lot of boys, it kind of just naturally happens. You end up taking up more of those quote unquote tomboyish sort of hobbies, and I always wondered that too. I'm like, growing up, I always wondered why I was more tomboyish than girlish. And I would say to this day, I definitely fall more under the tomboy than girlyish sort of, you know, personality. And I remember growing up, we used to essentially, go on dirt bikes and box with each other, and just have like these wrestling matches and play sort of, or me mostly watch them play like fighting games and things like Halo and whatnot. And I'd see them play on their GameCube and the PlayStation 2, and all of those things growing up. And another thing I feel like was a huge part of me growing up was the food. I remember specifically one time, my grandma had made caldo de pollo, and it was just like a humongous pot, and she had like this big table, and all of us were sitting around, and it was like during the cold winter months, and I remember just enjoying that soup so much. And I felt so, even though I didn't know it at the time, I felt like it was a very nutrient dense meal. I felt very satisfied after it, and I could feel like my body having and soaking in all the nutrients that it needed. And I didn't know what that meant at the time, but I could feel it in my body even if I didn't truly understand. And so I just remember just like looking around with all my cousins and family members, and I truly didn't realize, and still maybe part of me doesn't truly understand how that's not normal, like 10 to 20 people sitting around or more in like one house eating just a meal together, just like having TV playing in the background, just talking, laughing, enjoying past memories, and joking along with one another, and just having that sort of tight knit culture that doesn't truly exist in some cultures like European and whatnot. I don't know if um, their families are quite as huge or anything like that, but I do know like in Western culture, is more individualized and stuff like that. And so I was just thinking, like the food is a big one, the culture, the family members, just like all of that. Oh yeah, the music's a very big one too. I remember listening to a lot of duelo growing up, and mandingo, and este, like music like that. And then some country music here and there, because my grandma, she was born in Texas. She was born a Texan, like grew up in Texas, all that. Born in Texas, and my great grandma as well, and I probably her mom. So I have a lot of like those Texan roots. Um, and so a lot of Tejano music was a huge thing for me, and to this day I love Tejano music. Like I would say that that's like um my favorite genre of Mexican music, perhaps. And maybe it's like quote unquote Tex-Mex and blah blah blah, like it's not from Mexico or whatever, but I'd say that that's like a huge part of my identity, even though to this day I still haven't truly full set foot in Texas, myself. But regardless of any of that, of course there are cultural sort of experiences that we have too. Like I grew up Catholic, until I was 18 years old. But regardless, I had, the bautismo. Of course, I don't really remember it, but I have seen pictures of me in, the white dress, and looking at pictures inside like the Catholic church. Like there was like the red carpet and everything like that on the stairs with my family members taking pictures of me, my white shoes. I think might still have my white shoes. I don't know. Um, and so, yeah, just seeing that and having like, like the little gold bracelet, and I might have had the bracelet de lojo. I don't know, but I can't really think about it right now. And I had like short black hair. Don't have black hair anymore, but like little things like that. And I remember doing my communion and confirmation like in high school, I want to say, and meeting a couple of people from there, and just growing up and experiencing and knowing that I was in my small little world. I thought that that was it. You know, I remember growing up, we went to school Monday through Friday, and then Saturday, was cleaning day or whatever, and then and then it was cleaning day, and then, you'd go to the latest wedding or quinceañera or whatever, and then Sunday was church, and then the rest of the day you would rest, and then every week it was the same thing over and over and over again. And so that was something that I was accustomed to, and it was life, I didn't know any better. And then as I got older, when I started to have more of a choice whether to stay home or whatever, that's whenever I found myself, understanding more and seeing a little bit more of the darker side of things that I didn't understand as a child, seeing how certain dynamic relationships were playing out, especially, like at these parties, and seeing like the drunkenness and stuff like that. And I realized that it was something that made me feel uncomfortable. I definitely, in the prior episode, I talked about growing up as an only child. And so naturally, I gravitated more as an introvert, and still do, And so I think that it just became too overstimulating for me. All the sight, all the, all the sound and all the sights around me, and everything just feeling overwhelming. And just the feeling of people watching you and looking at you, perhaps judging you, things like that, of that nature. And being weary or afraid or nervous if I were to see someone from school, like things of that nature. And I'm sure I did from time to time. But regardless, I eventually started asking to stay home, and I was allowed to. And so my Saturday nights became more about, probably more than likely I was watching TV, or like by that time I had probably had a phone, and, talking to friends, being on social media or whatever. And, you know, and with time, I think we stopped going to church as much as well. And so eventually, I think our Saturdays became free, especially more after when my little sisters were born, when I was in high school. And so around that time, I would say maybe a little bit before, because um, where I grew up, there really wasn't many stores like very close by, because it was a lot of like ranch type of like style, lots of like grassy fields, and just very, you know, just full of vegetation, right? And then late middle school, perhaps, or early high school, maybe late middle school, they started construction on the road that I grew up on, in the sense of, instead of it being just a simple 2-lane road, they made it into like four. And they made this huge intersection to where these roads would connect. And eventually, obviously now it's already done, but basically now, less than 10 minutes from my childhood home, there's like a huge, like, quote unquote mini plaza, in the sense of like there's like restaurants there, stores. Now there's a gym. It's not ready yet, but there's a gym there. And there's a movie theater and a gas station, a grocery store. I mean, just all of these things that weren't there before. And so around that time, that's kind of like whenever it was kind of ready or, constructed. And so our weekends became going to the movies or going to the store and going shopping, because don't get me wrong, growing up, every now and then we would go to Fun Spot, or we would go to, which is this place in Kissimmee that's like a little mini amusement park. And once in a blue moon, because I had an aunt, well, a great aunt to be fair, that worked at Disney. So every now and then I would go to Disney with her and her daughters. Mostly we would go to Epcot, I would want to say. And then eventually I think my mom had somebody or knew somebody or whatever that would give out like tickets and whatever. And so we started going like every now and then too. I remember going for like my 10th birthday maybe for the first time or something like that, or maybe 11th, I don't really remember. But regardless, things like that. And every now and then, we would go to the beach. I think it was called the Ben T. Davis Beach or something like that. Like it was like closer to the house, like the closest beach that was there. Because obviously, like I said, I grew up in South Central Florida, and so beaches were readily available. And I think honestly, because we stepped away from the normal sort of everyday weekend routine, that's what allowed us to be able to branch out and to experience more variety of different activities that could happen. Because I do remember once in a blue moon going to the movies, but like the movie theater was like 40 minutes away, but since now there's one closer, it was a lot more accessible, to be able to get to watch a movie more frequently in the theater. And so I want to say that because the area that I grew up in has grown so much, there has been much more opportunity to be able to have these experiences. And every now and then, I think I remember like something that was really fun was going to Chuck E. Cheese and stuff like that. But I do remember December 12th. That was like a very big one. Was La Virgen de Guadalupe's birthday. The Virgin Mary, and Catholic religion. That's something that's very much celebrated. And I do remember a really fun part afterward was that we also got to get like these tamales that were like multicolored, and they were sweet, and they had I want to say like cream cheese in them and stuff like that. And we would eat them. Some of them were empty, but regardless, we would go to like a random person's house and eat them, and drink abuelita's hot chocolate, which to this day I definitely do prefer it more. But I do truly believe that a part of me feels like I wouldn't change it. I really wouldn't change it. Like, I am so grateful to have grown up and experienced two cultures at the same time, my Mexican and my American culture, because I, without both, wouldn't be the person that I am today. And that just, I guess, just to piggyback off that, to like wrap up the episode, because growing up as a woman of color, I was able to see and experience and understand things that perhaps maybe the typical person doesn't. And that having that experience growing up of, those, the dark side of the scrutiny, and not understanding the English language or being able to articulate myself the way I would like to, or not knowing a certain word in English, or a certain word in Spanish, right? Because that's very real too. Or not performing as well in school because of the language barrier, or perhaps just not understanding or seeing the value of it because of the culture. Not emphasizing education as much, or education not being as well as it could have been, in the area that I grew up in, not being challenged enough, being bored, and just having this sort of environment around me in which, the men just went off to work in construction or whatever it was, or handyman work, and then the women had kids young and they did either housekeeping or they worked in restaurants. And so for me, I knew I always wanted to go to college, but I truly didn't know the impact that it would have later on in my life, choosing to. And now that I'm about, 5 months away, or maybe even a little bit less, from graduating college, with my bachelor's degree, and having, this opportunity after graduation, some months after, to be able to branch out in my career, that probably would have never been able to happen had I not, pursued a college education, and just pushing past those stereotypes of that's all I would ever amount to, and that I wasn't smart, and that I wouldn't be able to be one of the people that made it or could be successful. That's something that I truly had to fight against growing up so much, in the sense of, okay, this is the only thing I see, the only environment that I know, but I know there's something more. And I truly do feel like, traveling outside of the country for the first time back whenever I was 16, was truly what opened my eyes. And you know what? That's definitely going to have to be the next episode, of how traveling outside of the country, and, different places around, the United States as well, has impacted my worldview and how it's helped me grow. Well, I know you guys, today was a little bit of a longer episode, but I had much to say as far as everything, growing up and whatnot. But I love you guys. I appreciate you. Thank you so much for listening in. And as always, thank you for tuning in on Walking Away from Lukewarm Living. I'm your host, Suli. And as always, God bless.